And now it's time for another St. Louis 7 following this week's episode with Ed Wheatley. Just got done talking a lot about St. Louis baseball on an episode of Overtime with Oliver. Ed really enjoyed it. Some fascinating stuff, man. St. Louis and baseball go hand in hand, huh?
Right. Absolutely.
Show the book. Show the book that we just talked about.
This is the new book, Baseball in St. Louis. It's out and available now, and we're working on a film for PBS to follow up my two Browns films that'll premiere in March 2021.
And the two Browns books / films are again?
The book is St. Louis Browns, the story of a beloved team, and the PBS films, which you can go out to the 9 Network PBS and find the films. The first one was called St. Louis Browns, the team baseball forgot. It's not narrated by John Hamm. And that tells the history of the Browns. And then we followed that up with the fans' memories. And that second film is a baseball legacy. The fans remember the St. Louis Browns. It's narrated by Dan McLaughlin.
And if you're from St. Louis, the films I'm talking about are just fascinating because there's live actual footage of what was going on downtown in 44 and what Shoto and Jefferson looked like in 25. And I just found that rare. Where'd you get all the footage from?
I do a lot of research. I go, the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, the Missouri History Museum archives there in Forest Park. The Cardinal archives. As president of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society, we have a large archives of our own. And, you spend a lot of time at the Library of Congress just going through, there's both, the book and the films, to me, that's all about, going back in time. Memorabilia, each book, the Browns book has, over 600 photos and pieces of memorabilia. And the book, Baseball in St. Louis, has all this memorabilia from the high schools, the little leagues, the Corey leagues, the American Legion teams, because that's, to me, each one of those pictures, as they say, is worth 100 extra words to what you write.
It was great. All right, time for St. Louis 7. You ready?
Yep.
First question. Where'd you go to high school? What do you remember?
I went to high school in Riverview Gardens. I graduated in 1971, and probably the biggest thing in those days that I remember was that's when people started wearing their hair long, and the principal would walk around and with a ruler and measure the guys' hair to their collar and girls' skirts to their knee, and it was a different world then.
Question number 2: who was the better team in the 20s, the Cardinals or the Browns?
It depends on which half of the 20 you're talking about. The first half of the 20s, it's definitely the Browns. They were one of the greatest teams. But then the Cardinals minor league, which they created, the minor league system kicked in, and the Cardinals were in the World Series in 26 and 28. So you really can't say of the whole. You got to, if you say the whole decade, you got to give it to the Cardinals because they had 2 World Series teams.
When you go to Ted Drew's, what do you order?
It's the one with cherries and the frozen yogurt. I can't remember what it's called, but it's with the cherries.
It's like a Redbird thing, I think.
Yeah.
You encounter 10 stop signs. How many do you roll?
I probably 0, even though that's a St. Louis tradition, is the roll. But I spent a lifetime working with Southwestern Bell, and we were keen on safety. And one of the things you never would get is tickets or any issues. So you became, safety was number one, and that. So it's just ingrained. From not rolling a stop sign to shutting doors or leaving desk drawers open, it was always a conscious thing that was ingrained in everyone.
Favorite concert you've ever seen in St. Louis?
I've seen a bunch, but it's going to probably sound very odd. I've seen The Who, I've seen so many different, but probably the most unbelievable one was in 1976. My younger sister grew up, Elvis had all these movies that would come out, and all the young girls loved Elvis, I guess they would say. But he came to town. There was a strike in Las Vegas, and he brought his whole act, from the opening skits to the the magician, the whole 9 yards. He took it on a national tour, and he came to St. Louis, and I took my younger sister to that, and I mean, I was blown away. You know, I was not necessarily a big Elvis fan, but holy cow, that was just an unbelievable. And they do, all of a sudden, the lights do go out, and it's Elvis has left the building.
Very nice. People come and visit you in St. Louis. Where do you take them?
Well, generally, everybody will say, let's go to a ball game. So, I mean, that's number one. You go to the ball game, you go to the Cardinal Hall of Fame. That's where everybody wants to go when they come to St. Louis.
All right, so we're going to wrap up. One more question. Again, we're speaking with Ed Wheatley. The book, show them the book again. St. Louis Baseball. From little leagues to major leagues.
Correct.
As we wrap it up, everybody check out the episode on Overtime with Oliver. Last question for you, Ed. What makes you proud to be a St. Louisan?
I think St. Louis, it's a big city, but yet it's got this small hometown feel. It's, you know, it's like just the same question. Where'd you asked, and everybody asked, where'd you go to high school? It's just that it tells you about everything. It's just the way the town is, and they still retain. You know, it's always amazing. People ask, why do you go to high school? Because nobody leaves. You know, that is probably the key. And that's when I wrote the new book. It wasn't, you know, where you go to high school, is where'd you play ball, because that tells you everything about you as a sports player and where you played. But I mean, I think just the fact that this question that is just so unique to St. Louis, where'd you go to high school, is because people don't leave the town. They stay. And, you know, there was, as we said, at one time it was the fourth largest city. And even, you know, growing up, when I was coming out of high school, I went to college, but so many people didn't, because there was so much you could get jobs. There was 4 auto plants. You know, we had McDonnell Douglas, Emerson. We had some of the biggest corporations. I remember studies I did when I was working with Southwestern Bell in 1985. We were ranked 4th for most Fortune 500 corporations in a city, and that were headquartered here. So, I mean, it's just a unique place with history, and being a historian, you enjoy that history and the respect people have for it.
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Thank you, buddy.